thank you for joining us for our risk management seminar, but this is a special one because it includes the commercial division. And I want to welcome everybody for joining us. I'm the chair of this year's commercial division. We're very excited to have our speakers that are going to be covering a very important topic. But before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a couple of things about the commercial division and all the resources that we have to offer to our members. First and foremost, we have monthly real estate classes geared for the commercial or multi-residential agent. And it's very, very informative, very affordable. And then we have networking events held at the association. Those are free, and we have a lot of good information and presenters at those events as well. We have our once a year premier commercial day coming up. Michelle's going to share the screen with that information. Let's see. Commercial day is coming up, and it's going to be at the association. We have really great lineup of people, including our very own from NAR, Lawrence Yoon. That's going to be doing a presentation. So if you want to register, you could, there's a QR code. Please go ahead and register for that. And we also have an opt-in for commercial notifications through our texting app, which is also on the screen. So if you want to get updates on any of our networking classes or special events, if you opt into this a text message, you will be notified. Other than that, I'm looking forward to our speakers. So I'm going to turn the screen to our moderator, Jan, who's a part of our commercial committee as well. Thank you, Jan. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Gina. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. We have a very exciting Zoom meeting today with amazing speakers. And just to set the tone right, we are not looking at a rosy day where the deal goes perfect as we all agents imagine or hope for. And we are talking about a deal where it goes south, there are issues, and what to do in that case. The first speaker is John Shimon, a very decorated appraiser and with massive experience, with a very good eye on the numbers. So, John, let me just go to the juice with the first question. Walk us through a deal where you, as the appraisal came in below the contract price, or at least what the buyer or the borrower was expecting. What caused the gap, and what happened to the deal in that scenario? Oh, you're on mute, John.
Good afternoon, everyone. It never fails, right? So,
yes, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you. I think that's an excellent question, Jan. I think I would just want to start by saying that the appraiser really has a job that's really twofold. So once the appraiser is engaged by the client, the job of that appraiser is to find market-supported value, regardless of what the contract price is, and then present that finding into an easy-to-understand report so that when the reader is going through the report, they can understand their assumptions in that report. So to answer the question, when an appraisal comes in below contract price, I think the appraisal here has discovered a gap between the market perception of value and then the negotiated price. So essentially, basically, the parties can still move the deal forward, but it certainly sets a clearer understanding of the risks now and the assumptions that are involved in the deal, right? So one deal that comes to mind involved a commercial property. The purchase price was significantly above included market value. So as you know, today, we are in a changing environment, right? So when we look at the market cap rates, they're expanding. When we look at rental rates, they're stagnant. When we look at vacancies, they're rising. Expenses are increasing. And if you had a listing that was on the market 12 months ago, those assumptions are definitely not correct, and it's not market reality. So I think to lay it out, the appraiser is simply going to measure the market value based on recorded sales and market reality. So in that property, I think there was some emotion involved in that particular case. The buyer had a strong business reason for wanting that specific commercial property. But look, at the end of the day, my role wasn't to determine what it was worth for that particular buyer. It was to determine what the broader market would like to pay, would likely pay under those fair market value assumptions. So, for example, when I looked at the deal, the comparable sales, I looked at market conditions, I looked up the income potential of that property and what it could generate, and then the overall risk. I think the market just simply didn't support that contract price. So going back to the emotion, that probably played into the negotiations between buyer and seller. So as you can imagine, of course, based on that, the appraisal ultimately came in below the contract price. And of course, everyone wanted to know why. So I had to walk them through the steps. Like, I had to talk to the lender, the parties that were involved, go through the comparables, the capitalization rates, the vacancies, the expenses, and my value reasoning. And look, at the end of the day, once everyone understood that the appraisal wasn't saying that the property isn't desirable, it was just simply measuring market value rather than investment value to a buyer. So I think that the discussion became more productive. And look, there were several options that the parties could take. It was to renegotiate the purchase price or maybe increase the equity contribution and maybe challenge the appraisal. We've seen that happen in the past, right? But at the end of the day, in that particular scenario, the price was renegotiated and the buyer came in with some additional equity that he contributed. Look, I think the biggest lesson from that transaction was that the appraisal did not create the problem. It really essentially identified a gap between what was negotiated between the parties and what the market evidence supported. That's really an important distinction for me as an appraiser. So sometimes the gap is small, sometimes it's significant, but it gives everyone an opportunity to make an informed decision. Essentially, the appraisal is really a risk management tool, if that
Beautiful.
makes sense.
Beautiful. Yes, great. Thank you so much for walking us through that. And you talked about the assumptions, and one of the bad assumptions that I see that happens quite a lot is in rent rolls. Can you share with us what are the bad assumptions that agents could mitigate or not make that could make your job easy and also make the transaction go smoothly?
Oh, great question again, Jan. So look, there are many common issues that everyone should be looking for. If you've ever reviewed a commercial appraisal in the income section, it's a walk step by step of what to look for. So I think one of the biggest isn't that the numbers are intentionally wrong when it comes to offering memorandums. It's that I think they often are overly optimistic or they haven't really normalized to reflect market reality. So if the offering memorandum is 12 months old, 18 months old, the numbers are going to be much different. So as an appraiser, my job is to test those assumptions against markets before a lender or an investor makes that decision. So I think bad assumptions would include that I've seen common is market rent versus in-place contract rents. So what do I mean by that? So I often see these offering memorandums come in with pro formas that are market rents, even though the current leases are below market or the building is subject to rent control. Or maybe if it's a commercial building like an office or a retail building, they have long-term lease restrictions. So that's some assumptions. Other assumptions, again, would be vacancy. I see some where they have 100% occupancy, where in reality, as appraisers, we have to consider what we call frictional vacancy. So that's like the downtime between tenants and releasing an asset. Other bad assumptions, and this is really probably the most common issue that I see, is operating expenses. As an appraiser, I have a whole bunch of data sets that I review all the time to keep me up to date on what's going on when it comes to expenses. So when we're doing a commercial property, we're looking at taxes, we're looking at insurance, repairs and maintenance, utility costs. And believe it or not, many offering memorandums come in and I look at them and they only have the seller's tax bill included in that offering memorandum. There is no reassessment for a post-sale, which is significantly different, right? If we look at insurance costs, they've gone through the roof over the past couple of years or so. Repairs, when it comes to parts and labor, have gone up very high. And we can't forget utilities, the same thing. And I can go on. Deferred maintenance issues. So, for example, the rental may look great, but as an appraiser and you walk in the property, you're going to pick up on different things. So, for me, uh, one classic example would be that's not included in a rental would be a roof. Is the roof at the end of its life cycle? Are the HVAC units at the end of their life cycle need replacement? What about the parking lot? Does that require resurfacing? I think if deferred capital expenditures are not included, then you absolutely have an issue that affects value. And then there's I mean, I can go on if you want me to. So I don't know if that's enough, but
Perfect. That's plenty. And I'm sure I had a bunch of other questions. As you know, we have a kind of a time crunch on us, and I see some questions popping up in the chat, which, if everyone is okay, we'll handle all the questions at the very end after all the speakers got a chance to share what we had in mind. So my final question is, how do title and environmental problems actually show up in an appraisal that sort of paves the way for our next speakers? How would you approach that?
I think that's really an excellent question, and I would more than likely defer to both Ami and Mark. But I think when it comes to environmental issues, we as appraisers, we don't determine whether there are title issues or environmental issues exist. We have disclosures and we try to protect ourselves. We don't analyze how these issues affect the market value. If they're known, if we are engaged and Army is part of the deal and they say, look, Army did a report and look, this requires a cleanup, then I have to really consider that now. That report comes into play. But, there are like easement issues when it comes to title. There may be some unresolved access issues in title. Maybe there's a cloud on title. So all of these things, when it comes to an appraisal, it's going to either reduce the income potential of that property. It may increase operating costs. And then, of course, there's remediation in the event that there is contamination on that property. So basically, I think it can be addressed in several ways. Buyers will probably pay less. Buyers may require a higher rate of return on that property, or ultimately the buyer may walk away. But I would defer to Ami and Mark on those two issues.
Beautiful. Thank you so very much, John. And if you could just hang on with us for the questions toward the end, but we appreciate your amazing experience and sharing all these stories with us. Thank you so much. So with that, we move on to our next speaker, Mark Stipkovich, a VP of Sales in Lawyer's Title with amazing experience on title. Helped massive amount of clients when it comes to commercial or residential. So, Mark, let me start with the first question. Tell us about a closing that nearly died or actually did die because of something that was buried in title. When was it, and how did it surface in the deal? If you could share that with us, that would be great.
Perfect. Yeah. Hi, everybody. It's cool. I see a lot of familiar faces from the past here. I guess I've been doing this way too long. So hello, everybody. So kill the deal. I never like to use the term kill the deal, even though it does happen, right? Because in my world, it's all about just trying to find solutions to problems, right? So if you have a motivated seller and you have a motivated buyer, we can always figure out how to solve an issue. And I actually had a deal take 7 years to close one time, um, believe it or not, because there was a les pendens. There was a lawsuit pending on the deal. And this was known up front. We ran the prelim, lawsuit popped up, called the agent. I was like, hey, there's a pending lawsuit here. And he's like, do your magic and fix it. And I'm like, there's no magic here. Like the lawsuit has to be fixed. And he's like, we'll close it eventually. And 7 years later, buyer stayed in escrow, and they did close it eventually because the buyer made like $1 million while they're in escrow because the seller couldn't get out of the contract. So when I say that, that means everything's solvable if there's enough time involved. But to kind of go through a list of things that do kind of can happen during a transaction, lawsuits are number one. Sometimes people will just wait to see when you get into escrow before they start filing things against you. They've been waiting for that moment. Personal liens and judgments can pop up after the sellers turn in their statement of information. So if somebody has any personal liens and judgments, title's not only looking at the property itself, we're actually underwriting the individuals as well. So if they have personal liens or judgments against them and they choose to turn in their statement of information late in the process, these things can hit late in the deal and maybe affect a closing. Um, Ownership discrepancies, if you have multiple owners or an entity or an LLC, or maybe somebody passed away and now you have other relatives involved. If they're not all on the same page, that can really present a problem. Another weird one that's killed a couple deals is unrecorded easements where they were recorded on one property, but not the subject property was actually selling, right? So you and I, Jan, we own a property next to each other. You're like, hey, I want to use this part of your property. I say, cool, give me 10 grand. You give me 10 grand. You drop an easement and you record it on your property, but you never record it on mine, right? And so then I go to sell and it never pops up. And then you walk over and say, hey, I got this easement right here. And it kind of blows the deal up because it was never recorded on both properties. Had a big claim on one of those actually. Um, and then another one with commercial, you'll see occasionally, the appraiser kind of talked about it, access points, right? Certain people have owned some of these commercial properties for so long, groups of them together, and then they want to sell them off in pieces. But all these areas have been shared. And so there's no real clarification on access, on boundaries, on where what starts and stops. So a lot of times that might need to be hashed out before it actually goes to market and sells. So those are things that have, many
Beautiful.
things have happened over the past.
Amazing points. Thank you so much for sharing that. And a lot of us agents, we assume title insurance is going to cover everything. So tell us what is not covered. What are those exceptions that agents usually skim past that could bite us down the line?
Yeah, that's another thing too. I get these questions all the time. What can I build? What can we do? That's not title. Like that's not what we're insuring, right? So that's one of the biggest misconceptions that we cover everything. We don't. Schedule B will kind of list exceptions to the policy, right? That will be CC&Rs, minimal rights, possible encroachments, unrecorded easements, public records. But let's talk about two different types of policy because we're talking about commercial here, right? Majority of commercial properties get a CLTA policy, right? And that's kind of like the bare minimum sort of protection, right? It's kind of like we're just ensuring the rights, we're ensuring what you have access to, what you don't, what other people might own against it. And we're not really covering boundary issues, easement issues, certain things like that. When a commercial client wants extended coverage, the Alta coverage, they require an Alta survey. And then they would get a whole list of things that would cover it, including those unrecorded easements or unrecorded things that might pop up in the past. So I'd say the biggest misconception is that they think title covers everything, when in reality, we're just covering your rights to the property, ownership chain, and priority. It really has nothing to do with the use of the property or what's like vacant land, 150 units. It's really the same thing to us. We don't care if there's a structure there or not because that's not what we're insuring.
Beautiful. That covers the question very, very beautifully. Tell us a little bit about entity authority that is very common in commercial transactions. Who actually has the power to sign the LLC or trust, and how does that entity could derail, or the lack of the power to sign could derail the closing?
Yeah, a lot of times you'll have one or two parties that are sort of leading a transaction ahead, and we always require the trust documents, the LLC entity, all of the corporate documents to be presented to us. And then sometimes when they're presented, we see that other parties might have to be involved in a transaction or need to sign off or need to agree. And some of the people who even making the decisions aren't even on it. So that's where, discrepancies can sort of lie, where it's like, yeah, you got two or three parties that are like a go on a deal, but this person won't sign. And it's like, you can't really close that deal unless everybody agrees. So that's why we're in the fraud prevention business, right? Um, Power of attorneys, like when people are trying to do power of attorneys, I got a good stat for you here. So 40% of all real estate fraud in the United States takes place in LA County, right? So let me repeat that. 40% of all real estate fraud in the United States takes place in LA County. Now, we are the largest market. We do about 18% of the transactions, but we double that amount in fraud, right? So that's really the biggest key, is that we're gonna use a magnifying glass, checking that ownership. We don't like power of attorneys. We don't like people signing on behalf of other people. So we get very, very technical on that kind of stuff because we're in the fraud prevention business, and a title fee might cost $2 or $3, $4,000, and the losses could be in the millions on that one file if we make a mistake. So we're very careful about that.
Wow, that's a shocker. That I didn't know that. So that leads me to the next question. What is that one document that agents should insist on getting to catch a title defect before the crisis or the issue happens? Which document would you recommend is a
I,
must?
I like I like that one, the one document. I'm going to give a better answer to that. But if I'm going to say one document, I'm going to say statement of information, right? Because the statement of information is really going to kind of complete the picture for us. And a lot of times when people have those personal liens and judgments, that's where it pops up. But I would just say from a standpoint of having a bunch of agents here who want to do a good job, is you open up your files early. Okay, you have a professional read them and go through them and figure out if there's actually any issues. If I have 100 deals going, 90% of them clean as a whistle. 10% of them takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And we'll see these problems ahead of time. I'll see them on a property profile ahead of time and be like, hey, we need to order a prelim. We need to look at this. This might be a probate issue. This might be a Hegstat issue. This might be this issue. We need to get ahead of it. We need to analyze it. We need to get together and clear it ahead of time before you go to market. So that's part of just having like a professional. You order it ahead of time. You let me look at it. You let me advise you and the client so that we avoid all of these issues when we go to market, right? That's the biggest key. So listing, you get a listing, order a prelim, have a professional look at it. A lot of times these reps nowadays are just popping into ChatGPT and they're like, oh, well, here's this. It's like you need to have somebody who knows what they're doing, how to talk to your clients, educate your clients, because we are seeing a lot of transactions with a lot of, people who've owned properties, right? The silver tsunami sort of coming along, right? We're seeing people 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s own these properties 50, 60, 70 years, passing away. There's lots of stuff that's going on that are very technical, and they're not hard to fix, but you need somebody who knows what they're doing and knows how to deal with management to get these things quickly approved and how to move and make it simple, not make it more complicated. That's the biggest key. And doing everything up front is the biggest key to that.
Beautiful. You definitely made us smarter today. Thank you so much, Mark. That helps me to go and move on to the next speaker, rounding up our panel, Ami Adini, an environmental consultant who has expertise essential to everyone who is coming to that side of the deal where liabilities lie. And let me start with the first question, Ami. given the deal needs maybe phase one or phase two, tell us something about the buyer never saw coming and it was found, and what did it cost? And then in dollars amount and in time, if you could share with us a scenario in phase one or phase two where we had a nightmare situation that you saw.
Well, okay. A nightmare is in the eye of the beholder, So, some people tend to dream more at night, than others. But a recent transaction, there was, it's not far away from where your office is here in Northridge, and the it was a property with it's a kind of auto mechanics, several auto mechanics. There were several shops of auto mechanics in one building, and the phase one consultant indicated that they were concerned because they found records of there used to be a tank there, and they found a record, and overall auto mechanics they were a little bit concerned. So we were retained to do the phase two. And actually, we found a tank there. There was an actual tank that nobody knew about it. But the tank was not the issue. The issue was that, and it was kind of a rare issue, but in one of these auto mechanic shops, they have this degreasing equipment where they put parts into it and they wash them with hot water. In the past, they used to wash them with solvents, and it leaked. What we did, we tested the soil vapor all over the property because this is our most precise indication. If there could be an issue, we test the soil vapor. And we tested it all over the property, and with it zero, our results zeroed in on one of the mechanic shop where they had this degreasing equipment. And we found a high level of concentration of toxic vapor, chlorinated solvents, under the machine. Now, when we test at 5 feet under the ground, okay? Because the phase two, the basic premise of the phase two is to tell you yes or no, okay? Phase one tell you basically if you have something to worry about. Phase two says, yeah, indeed, you have something to worry about. But phase two does not necessarily give you the entire picture because it just say, okay, it's like, you went to the doctor and you said, I don't feel good, and it makes you several tests and say, okay, well, looks like something your urine test or your blood test, but it doesn't give you the whole picture. So same with us, with the phase two, we know that there is a greater potential for a problem than the phase one indicated, but we don't know the potential yet. We just know it's there. And so the parties to the transaction, the stakeholders, right away asked us, well, what is the worst case scenario? And we told them that it's like going to the doctor when you have a fever and you ask the doctor what is the worst case scenario. All right, so it's very open question, and so because we only had the first parameter, there is your temperature is high. That's all what we know. Okay, and so if you want to know better to evaluate the risk, we need to do more tests, similar to what your doctor is telling you. You need to do more tests. And so what is the additional cost of the test? So we give them additional cost. It was, I think, anywhere between maybe 8,000 to 14,000. And then they got into the negotiation, the owner and the buyer. It was a cash deal. And I was not privy to the negotiations. All what I knew from the owner, the buyer said he wanted a $400,000 discount in order to buy it. Get me a 400. I asked what is the value of the property? What is the offering price? I think the offering price was about $2.2 million. I think it's something in this range. And the buyer said he wants 400,000. So I don't know where it ended off, and I have no idea. I'm out of this thing, but it's now that's where it stands. So in my personal opinion, it is cheaper to do additional tests than to give a $400,000 discount. But that's that's my opinion, and I know, but I have no idea where in the law, you see. So this is a case where it started with nothing and it came out to something, and now the interested the stakeholders, one of them is trying to make something into the Armageddon deal, and the other one is Armageddon, and the other one is saying and they're negotiating, but I don't know how to negotiate on that because I'm an engineer, so
Of
I
course.
negotiate. I negotiate on real numbers,
Of course. That's great.
So
Of
that's my
course.
sense, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That kind of leads me to the next question I have. So, are there any specific use for commercial properties that the agent should automatically assume there's a problem? Like, we have gas stations, we have dry cleaners, all these sort of properties. Is there one or a couple specific use that you would say it's safe to assume there should be or could be a problem most likely?
And I tell you, when I saw this question first, it took me about 3 minutes to think about the answer. And because, we are talking here in probabilities, okay? So the probability, I can only talk in terms of probabilities. And I can tell you, look, if you have a dry cleaner on the premises, you have a 70% probability of a big problem. That's your probability. If you have an auto mechanic on the premises, you have somewhere between 5 to 10% probability, okay? That's on the premises. Now, if you have a gasoline station on the premises, most of them are okay, but you may want to check for something, for soil vapor. And now, if you have a gasoline station next door that at one time in the future, it leaked and it cleaned up and it got no further action, it got a clean bill of health from the government, and it is just on the other side of the wall from your property, well, I would say you have 20% chance to worry about, because at the time when they closed the case, it never checked about toxic vapor migrating to the neighbors. And with the gasoline station across the fence, you have maybe 20% chance. So we are talking in terms, again, of probabilities. If you have a dry cleaner 300 feet away, I will tell you, in my experience, you have maybe 5% probability. It's very rare that it would impact you. So it's very hard to say, well, if I walk into a property and I see a tank when it's leaking, I tell you right away, okay, you've got a problem on your hand right away. But that's my answer. There is no single case that should light the red light right away, because I've seen cases where everything looked perfect and turned out to be a nightmare. All right. So just on first look, I mean, nobody would have expected that there was something there. And and the other way is also around us. So properties, when they saw it really, apocalyptic, and it was not. It was not at all. So it all comes down to probabilities.
Absolutely. Yes. Very good point. And thanks for sharing those probabilities. So dry cleaner probably is the number one with the highest probability in that question.
On the property, dry cleaner
Yes.
on the property that operated there anywhere from the 1930s until at least 2000, it's a 70%
Wow.
by actual statistics.
That's
Okay.
a high chance. So another question that is kind of related to this previous question is, why does it, per my experience, a lot of times we see that the environmental phases that we need to do during the transaction, they often exceed the due diligence period. Why is it so, and what do you think the agent can do to mitigate that? What can they do proactively to basically meet the deadline that they have for that?
The most practical, the best answer is tell the owner to do the phase one before they even put the property on the market. And I find that not most, but many owners, many sellers don't want to spend the money on that. But once you wait and you do the phase one, in the middle of the transaction, when you open escrow, all bets are off, okay? It can extend the transaction anywhere from 30 days to 6 months to a year. You see, I've seen it happen. So that I would say that's the best thing that you can do. Convince your owner and your seller. Do the phase one before you even open escrow. And this will save you a lot of time and a lot of headache and worries. And it will give you will be more in control of the situation because knowledge is power, for God's sake, you know. You know what is going on. So you walk into the transaction and you already know, okay? But if you don't know and you walk into it, I mean, it opened all kind of possibilities. And that start to extend the escrow, and then parties are getting disappointed and they argue and all of that stuff, you know.
Beautiful. That's words of wisdom. Thank you so much. Now, if that's okay, let me go back to the questions that we have a few in the chat. The first one is from Christina. I think this is where John was talking about the rent rolls. She mentioned, does the criteria change if the current tenant is in triple net? So that was a question she had. And John, if you don't mind answering that question for us, that would be great.
Yeah, I think it really bodes well to read every lease agreement that is part of that property. If you have a multi-tenant shopping center, review the lease, look at the language that's in the lease, look at the free rents that they're offering, look at all the different things that may trigger an issue with value. Triple nets are favorable by investors because, obviously it takes away the expenses, the expense burden on the landlord, and it passes it to the tenants. So you got to be mindful of that. Those are very favorable. Keep in mind that not all triple net tenants are equal. So you may have a credit tenant, a Walmart, a Costco, and then you may have a triple net tenant, but that's a month to month. So yeah, not all tenants are equal. Not all leases are equal. You've got to do your due diligence and go through and review the language that's in that lease agreement.
Beautiful. And I apologize. It's Christian Ramos. For the name of the person who asked. Thank you so much, John. So the next question is for Mark. It's about judgment on a property. It says, regarding a judgment on a property that we are in escrow on, if the judgment is paid in full at close of escrow, does that permanently remove it from the property?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, little known fact on judgments too is they only have a 10-year shelf life. So a lot of times if a judgment's past 10 years, we'll get it automatically removed. But yes, as long as the judgment's paid at closing, permanently removed. Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. There's also another question. How does one discover unrecorded easements?
That's a problem, right? No, you can't, right? So with the ALTA policy, you have coverage if those do come up after the fact. With the CLTA policy, you don't have that, which is why a lot of clients will do that. But the only way they come up is typically, as I mentioned before, a neighbor or an owner or somebody is going to present somebody with an easement that was recorded on a different property that affects our subject property. That's the only way we're going to know about it. And it's typically going to happen after the fact. And I've had massive claims paid because a client, mainly residential, but he was planning on building this huge structure, this huge home, and he couldn't build a certain portion of it because of this unrecorded easement that was recorded on another property. So the only way they're presented is literally by somebody just actually walking them to the owner, certain things like that. No, none of us have any way of knowing about these if they are not recorded on the property, sadly.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I don't see any other questions in the chat. So let me just do a cross panel question. So take an older mixed use building on a commercial transaction. Show us how a problem in one area creates a problem in other. Starting with John, maybe tell us in a scenario where you pinpoint something and say something that could trigger a chain effect in other areas?
I think financial statements, profit and loss statements are really key. They're the roadmap for any buyer coming in. I think those need to match bank records for the buyers. So we really drill down on the income. The cash flows are really the heart of every appraisal that we do. So from that standpoint, you really want to understand the numbers, how those numbers were generated, and then of course look at the expenses and where they lie as well. But I think Gina has her hand up.
I was just going to ask John if you could also talk about the importance of having estoppel statements during the due diligence process,
Yeah. So this is
especially with multi-units.
Yeah, so that's really critical. So in every transaction, especially you need to confirm the tenant, what they have in deposits. All of those things are very, very important. So you've got to try and understand that the landlord typically will hold deposits for the tenants. The estoppel is a very, very plain, easy one-page, I believe, document that really clearly states what's owed to that tenant, because when that property transfers, that will transfer to the new owner. So estoppels are very, very important in every transaction, and they should be addressed with the agents. Agents should be aware of it. So make sure that you cross that, you understand what they are and how they're used.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, John. And for Mark, there is actually one specific question that is in the chat now. It says, regarding a current escrow on commercial property that has two APNs, one for the building and one for the parking lot. The parking lot has a recorded document, a covenant agreement giving off-street parking to a neighboring property because that neighboring property was going to add a second story. The addition never happened. The permit to build expired. The document was signed by a person not party to seller or member of non-profit that owns it. What can this be removed due to the fact that it was signed by an unauthorized person? Second, if the document states that this can be removed by superintendent of its deemed useful, we haven't been able to get this resolved. Why all of this is from 2004? Looks like it's an old situation.
Yeah, these can be issues. The reality is typically, like, this is where I get in and try to get creative with my underwriters. But typically, a title company underwriting department's not going to want to remove this, right? They remove it, and then all of a sudden, we become on the hook for something. Should somebody come back for some other reason? So what we typically require is that the Department of Building and Safety, right, who was involved or with getting this recorded against the property, that they get it removed, they get it released, the city gets approved release. But a lot of times the city doesn't want to get involved either. So it becomes this sort of like, it becomes this circular motion. That's why having a good title rep can get creative on this sort of a thing. We might create an indemnity agreement. We might create something where it's like, hey, we'll agree to remove this, but you're also holding us harmless should there be a claim, right? As long as we're not paying. That's where I get really creative in my job with going above title officers' heads, above underwriters' heads, and talking to actual decision makers. Because my question is always, what's our exposure? What's our risk? Right? And it's obviously low, right? But we want some protection. So those get very tricky. Ultimately, a lot of title companies are going to want the city to solve it, but if you have a good title rep, good title company, they can come up with a solution that kind of makes everybody feel a lot more comfortable. Which kind of leads to the last question. Like, a lot of times we might do something, but the lender doesn't like it, or the lender wants something and the title company doesn't. So there's lots of this going on when you have like funky little things that pop up.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And before I move on to Ami for the last question, they're saying one other question says, Mark, did you say that LA County sells 18% of all properties in the country?
Yeah, so it varies, but the LA County market itself between refinances and sales makes up about 18% of all transactions nationwide. But
Beautiful.
we do 40% of the fraud.
Awesome. And we have Arnie. We have Arnie that has raised his hand. He may have a question. Arnie, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is a question across all of them. Let's say a lender orders an environmental report and we need a phase one. However, the timing of closing the transaction is going to be a problem. How will title work with that and the lender to make sure that we don't have a problem closing the transaction because of an environmental potential?
Title's not going to close unless all parties are going to agree to it.
Yeah.
So that means buyer, seller, lender, everybody is agreeing to close this deal. Otherwise, we're not going to close it.
Yeah.
So you're not going to bond around that?
No.
We're not going to bond around an environmental issue now.
Okay. And
Yeah.
how quickly can AMI do the phase one if timing is an issue?
Well, we can if we can do away with the building permits from the city, because it depends on the city. Los Angeles give us the records of building permits within 48 hours, okay? But other cities can take 10 days to give us. So many times we can do without records of building permits, and in such a case, we know within about 5 working days what is the situation. The bulk of the time is taking us to write the report, the full bona fide report. But we can give an opinion or the summary of the opinion within probably 5 working days if needed. But the report's taking time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Very great. And I think the time allows for 2 more questions. I see Ira has also raised his hand. Go ahead and unmute, please.
Hi, thank you. Mark, got a question, kind of a generic question. In the title world right now, what are some of the big lawsuits that we're seeing locally? I know we can't speak specifically, but what are some of the big lawsuits going on right now in transactions, and anything trickier than normal or anything we can do to avoid them? Thanks.
Man, a lot of these things we don't really see where it goes to a lawsuit, but we do see, I can tell you right now, and you guys have all seen this, property theft. Property theft is huge. Any of your clients that own multiple properties that have no loans against them, they're paid off. They can be vacant land, they could be residential, even commercial in some cases where they own a property completely paid off, are not local, right? So they live in Colorado, Canada, overseas. We're seeing these transactions, actually people fake being a seller, get a buyer, sell the property. I've had 2 clients purchase property and the whole transaction was completely fraudulent. Luckily, we weren't the title company involved. But there's so much fraud now with documentation and driver's license. People are just pretending to be sellers, and the sellers are not here, they're not local. And if you don't have like a really strong escrow officer who's willing to ask the questions, they're just trying to close a deal. We've noticed that the same escrow offices are kind of closing a few of these deals. So that's the biggest thing I would say, and everybody's dealing with it. So vacant land, you're getting random calls or random property paid off, empty, vacant, and the owners are nowhere near. We have a monitoring service now that we're offering to protect a lot of these clients for that. So you can talk to me offline about it, but that is the biggest thing we're seeing, and we're seeing multiple of these things per year.
Beautiful. And just before I hand over to the next part of the session, I want each of the speakers, if they could kindly give one specific sentence about the most expensive mistake that you see agents make in your area, starting with John. What is the most expensive mistake you see agents make? You're on mute, John. You're on mute.
Okay, here I am.
Yeah.
Here we go. So I think it's worth remembering today's discussion. If anything you want to remember is this. If it comes to appraisals, I think the appraisal should not be the first time someone really asks the true and hard questions. I think those questions need to start the day you meet, the agent that is, meets with the seller. You need to avoid surprises. You need to go ahead and put on your due diligence armor and collect intel on the subject property, right? Or the business. Package that information and share that information with the people that are involved in the deal. So I think that's something that's worth remembering.
Beautiful. Great point. I always say surprises are good for birthdays, but not in real estate, right? So now, Mark, give us a sense of the biggest mistake you see agents make in your area.
Yeah, pretty similar. I think I work with a lot of new agents. I work with obviously very experienced agents, as you know, but do a lot of training to new agents, and they get so excited when they finally get a deal or have a client or do certain things like that, that they're just so excited to do it that they don't necessarily pay attention to potential red flags or issues. And I don't ever want to be the bearer of bad news, but get me involved and let's look at it, because you a lot of times, again, people are misrepresenting certain things about themselves, and so you waste a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of effort on a deal you're probably never going to close because they're not sharing the full picture.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And Ami, how about your angle on that?
Well, let me give you a mistake that is worth a couple of $1 million. It's I have a client, and he already purchased a contaminated property, and he purchased a contaminated property at a discount of $2 million. And so in the process of negotiations, the attorneys prepared for both sides, they prepared the contract. And the seller, they wanted a guarantee by way of putting a collateral on my client's, on the buyer's properties. They said, well, okay, we will give you our property at $2 million discount, but you take it to the agencies and you close the case, and you guarantee that you close the case within 5 years. And if you don't close it within 5 years, you pay us back $5 million or whatever. And so, we'll give you $2 million, what will you give us? Because if he doesn't close the case and he walks away from it, the agencies will come back after them, after the original owners. So the attorneys are negotiating, and my clients send me the negotiated contract. And right away I saw there that they were negotiating what is called an NFA, no further action required condition, meaning the seller wants the buyer to bring the case to a point where the agency will issue a letter that says no further action required. And when I saw that, I said, no, don't do that, because in order to get a no further action required, the requirements are very, very, very strict. You usually do it when you take a commercial property and you want to turn and change it to a residential property or other sensitive use like hospital, kindergarten, school. But
He froze.
rather than NFA, LUC basically puts some restrictions on the use of the property, which they do not matter to commercial property. So they went ahead, submitted what I said to the sides, and the buyer and the seller agreed to sell it on basically to change the NFA condition to LUC. Now, had it stayed in the contract, the NFA, it would have been a disaster, because it would have cost, I told him, you could be talking $2 million, $3 million to clean it up. But if you change it to an LUC, a land use covenant, we probably can finish it, no guarantee, but we probably can finish it anywhere from $600,000 to $1.2 million, you see.
That's
And you have
true.
a discount of $2 million, so you can play with it. But anyways, this could have been a major, major mistake.
Very good. Thank you so much, Ami. And thank you for all our speakers, John, Mark, and Ami. You are phenomenal. Thanks for sharing your vast knowledge and wisdom.